Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. This is episode number 519, and it's going to be a bit of a bonus episode. For the past couple weeks, I've been adding in some episodes on Fridays. They've been, thus far, related to firearms. I talked about the pre-fit rifle barrel last week that I put together, and we spoke with Jaden from West Elk Precision, all about pre-fit rifle barrels and what they are. And today I had a question that I've gotten quite a bit via email, and I just thought it would be worth addressing publicly to talk through some things on barrel length. Now, in the last 5 to 7 years, I've had rifle barrels from 24 inches, 22 inches, 20 inches, 18 inches, and that latest 6mm Creedmoor that I put together is 16.5 inches. So what have I learned about barrel length? What have I noticed in terms of pros and cons and going shorter? But more importantly, what do you need to know about deciding on barrel length? The straw that broke the camel's back was from James, and it was, again, one of many emails that I've gotten, but I'm just going to use James's email as an example. He says, I'm building a 6mm Creedmoor primarily for hunting mule deer in Idaho, although I do hunt elk as well. He said, I don't plan to shoot past 500 yards at any game, and I don't reload yet, so I plan to use Hornady's Precision Hunter ammunition with the ELDX bullet for now. I will be using a suppressor and want to minimize barrel length without sacrificing terminal performance. Would you suggest that I go with a 20-inch, 18-inch, or 16-inch barrel for this rifle? So James's email is great because it gives us pretty much everything we need to know to make an informed decision, not based on preference or what I think James should do, but just to crunch some numbers and look at some scenarios. So that's what I want to do in this podcast, is just kind of talk through how you make these decisions, how to estimate the differences in what those barrel lengths might do for James. And let me say that I'll mention some numbers in this podcast, but it may be hard to follow verbally. So I'm sharing all of this in an article as well so that you guys can go and check it out. But really, what we need to know to answer the question for barrel length, or to give James some information to think through and make comparisons, is maximum shot distance he's willing to hunt with on game, the cartridge he will be using, the specific bullet he will be using, if he's using factory ammunition or plans to reload, the conditions that he plans to hunt in most often, or the location, terrain, not just conditions, and then, of course, the barrel lengths that he's considering. So in James' email, he covered all that. He said he wants to shoot up to 500 yards, but not past that. He's not reloading, so we'll be using factory ammunition, and we know what specific ammunition. And then he gave us where he's hunting, mule deer in Idaho. So, of course, there's some variability, but we can kind of know some elevation range that he may be hunting in. And then, of course, the barrel lengths that he's considering. So if we start to just put everything together, we can start with James and say, okay, 6mm Creedmoor with Hornady's Precision Hunter ammunition. That's a 103 grain ELDX bullet. And if we just look at what Hornady's going to publish, we can see that they're using a 24-inch barrel for their data, and that they reference a muzzle velocity of 3050, so 3,050 feet per second. So what we can do from here is begin to estimate velocity based on the barrel length that James mentioned, which would be 20, 18, and 16. So if he goes from a 24 to a 20, he's losing 4 inches and on downwards. Now there's rules of thumb out there for most centerfire rifle cartridges that you would basically lose 25 to 35 feet per second per inch of barrel length lost. And in my personal experience, I found that to be true. You can see all types of examples and data. You can look online, Google, YouTube, etc., and you can see people chopping down barrels by the inch and seeing what those speeds are. There's always going to be variability here. So the cartridge that's being used, the specific load and the powder type, the specific barrel, there is going to be variability, and there's no hard and fast rule. But if you look at a lot of data sources, and again, I can weigh in with my personal experience and say this 25 to 35 feet per second per inch of barrel length lost is pretty accurate. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's not a linear equation. You could have any given rifle with a given cartridge and bullet, and let's say you go from 24 inches down to 22 inches, and you lose 50 feet per second. So that averages to 25 feet per second per inch because we chopped down 2 inches. But if we keep going down, you may notice that as the barrel length gets shorter and shorter and shorter, we may lose more. So while you trim 2 inches from 24 to 22 and you lose 50 feet per second, an extreme example of going from 18 to 16, you may lose more than 50 feet per second. So it's not linear. Again, nothing's perfect. We're talking about estimations to look at and account for. So what I like to do is just say 30 feet per second. It's not gonna be perfect. It may be less, it may be more, but we're gonna pick 30 feet per second right in the middle of that 25 to 35 range. So again, there's a super simple formula. You're basically working with the box speed that the ammo manufacturer lists, the barrel length used for that speed, subtracting your barrel to get the difference in barrel length, and then multiplying that by 30. And that's how you can estimate muzzle velocity. So if we run those numbers for James, we can basically see that we could estimate if the 20-inch barrel, he'd be at 2840 feet per second. With an 18-inch barrel, he'd be 2780 feet per second. And with a 16-inch barrel, he would be at 2720 feet per second. Again, this is an estimation. To give you guys a practical example of this, I can talk about that 16.5-inch 6 Creedmoor that I just started to work with. And if I use the formula that I just discussed, but in this case, I was using Hornady's 108 ELD match ammunition. They list a test barrel of 24 inches with a muzzle velocity of 2960. If I estimate for a 16.5-inch barrel at 30 feet per second loss per inch, I should be getting 2735. My initial range trip, brand new barrel at 16.5 inches, I averaged just over 2,700 feet per second. So this is more in line with losing 35 feet per second per inch, not 30. But in all of my experience with proof barrels, which this one was, I fully expect to gain some speed as that barrel breaks in and approaches about 75 to 100 rounds down the barrel, speeding up about 30 to maybe 50 feet per second overall. So if it does speed up, say 30 feet per second total over break-in, that loss of 30 feet per second per inch in this formula is dead spot on. Again, I've said this before, keep this in mind. We are estimating and we're also using factory ammunition. Another thing to consider, which James mentioned, he plans to use factory ammunition, is that if you reload, you are going to be able to optimize this and probably have a speed that's closer to 20 to 25 feet per second loss, not the 30 to 35. But this muzzle velocity estimation is only part of the picture, right? Now we need to know, okay, James said he wants to hunt mule deer out to 500 yards. We have muzzle velocity. Now what do we do? So we just take this muzzle velocity for the specific bullet with BC, and then this is where some context on location and conditions comes into play. And we just want to run some ballistic calculators. We're going to take the ballistic coefficient of the bullet. We're going to take that bullet itself and try to understand what is our minimum velocity threshold at impact. So a bullet like the ELDX, a general rule of thumb is to say this bullet is going to expand or have ideal terminal performance, or at least consistent terminal performance, for the most part above 1,800 feet per second. So we have James' muzzle velocity estimation. We have his distance of 500 yards. We could pick for his context and say maybe 5,000 feet of elevation. And we can start plugging in some numbers and see, well, how far does these muzzle velocity ranges for these different barrel lengths get me with this specific bullet, and keeping that bullet at or above 1,800 feet per second impact velocity for the terminal performance aspect. So with the results, and I went ahead and broke this out, especially in the article, just to show a little bit of difference between altitude at 0 feet, at 5,000, and at 10,000. So to recap, the 20-inch barrel estimated muzzle velocity of 2840, 18-inch barrel estimated muzzle velocity of 2780, 16-inch barrel estimated muzzle velocity of 2720. And basically at the end of the day, the worst case scenario, meaning shortest barrel, slowest muzzle velocity, and at 0 elevation, we are at 1865 impact velocity at 500 yards. So he could get the shortest barrel, the slowest muzzle velocity, and the lowest altitude, and still keep this 103 grain ELDX at or slightly above the minimum expansion threshold at 500 yards. So if we just boil it down from here and say, hey, James, if you just want to plan on shooting this bullet at game out to 500 yards, you could go with a 16-inch barrel. Of course, if you begin to say he's hunting at 5,000 feet, not 0 feet, that muzzle velocity, that impact velocity at 500 yards jumps from 1865 to 1998. So he's well above 1,800 at this point. If he goes with, say, the 18-inch barrel, kind of the middle ground between everything you mentioned of 2018-16, at 0 altitude, he'd be at 1915 impact velocity at 500 yards. At 5,000 feet altitude, he'd be at 2050 impact velocity. So we can really see just by this data, by these estimations, and how much margin he wants to have, how much room for variability he wants to have. The 16-inch would do it. It's going to be less margin. The 18-inch is definitely going to do it and give him more margin. And then obviously the 20 is going to give him more than enough for his specific context of wanting to hunt out to 500 yards. So I hope that's helpful in just breaking this down, making some estimations, kind of future planning on, well, I want to go shorter, but how short is too short? Really, again, just to reiterate, you can make estimations, but you need to know several things. Your maximum shot distance, the cartridge you're using, the specific bullet you're using. You need to find for that cartridge and bullet some estimated velocities. In this case, we're taking it from factory ammunition. You could also do some online research and just see, hey, what are people getting for this bullet from this cartridge? And you have to take source into consideration. You're going to see wildly different numbers. But if you look in enough places or get enough reports from people, you can kind of average that out or see what's common. Again, factor in the location or the conditions you plan to hunt in most often, because if you're pushing to the edge, then the elevation does begin to matter. And then you can just go from there. So I hope that is super helpful. We didn't get into the pros and cons necessarily of short barrels. Obviously for me, as I mentioned up front, I've gone from 24 inches to 22 inches to 20 to 18 and now 16 and a half. So clearly I've been pretty dang happy with performance of short barreled rifles and with the maneuverability of them. Obviously, when you're using a suppressor and you're adding some length, the shorter barrel makes more sense. Also, as many of you have seen, I pair that with a chassis. So I can take a 16 to 18 inch barrel, have a suppressor on it, have a folding chassis, and really my rifle is no bigger than my pack, which is an incredible benefit, especially if you're hunting in thicker terrain. You have less barrel overhead. During a heavy pack out, you don't have the rifle buttstock extending below the pack line. I absolutely love the packability of these short rifles, the maneuverability when they're in the hand as well. And for me, the performance has been sufficient. The more I shoot, less and less concerned with extending my distance. And so for me, I'm willing to give up some speed, to give up some effective distance at far extended down ranges, and just say, hey, if I'm planning on shooting 500-600 yards as my max, I can get away with a really short, compact rifle. There are other things we didn't touch on, but are easy to also look at in your comparisons, such as wind drift, right? And again, this is going to come down again to cartridge and to specific bullet. We talked all about determining effective range based on the bullet and its impact velocity down range. But once you have a muzzle velocity in a given bullet and then you're given context, another number worth looking at is that wind drift. James may want to, for 16, 18, and 20 inch barrels, look at what are those wind drift numbers and how does that play into a factor, or does it, for him in terms of what barrel length he wants to go with. To reiterate as well, I know I mentioned 1,800 feet for the minimum expansion velocity. That is a widely used number for the ELDX bullet specifically. That's what James was talking about, so that's why I referenced it. Please note that that number varies based on the specific bullet. So don't take any bullet and just choose 1,800 feet per second. You want to research that. You want to contact the manufacturer. You want to see what people's experiences have been. Don't use 1,800 feet per second for every bullet. If you're, for example, shooting a mono all copper bullet, again, it depends on the specific one, depends on the type, the design, the materials, but I personally want to keep those above 2,000 feet per second in most cases. So that would be an example where, as you're crunching numbers and you're looking down range and you're looking at impact velocity, the bullet does matter. So keep that in mind. All right, I know I threw a lot at you guys pretty quickly, but I recapped all this. If you want to go see the formula, if you want to see the example of all the numbers for James, if you want to read a little bit more on this topic or be able to reference it in the future, go check out the link in the show description. That's all about short barrel speeds and effective range for big game hunting rifles. As always, guys, it'd be great to hear from you. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback for the show, you can always email us directly to podcast@exomountaingear.com. Thank you so much for following along, for staying engaged, for making this podcast really what it is. Because without you guys and your feedback, we wouldn't have kept going here for almost 10 years at this point. So I appreciate it. Thanks for making this a success. I hope you guys have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday with a Monday Minute episode and another full-length episode as well on Wednesday. Talk to you soon.